Well, hey folks, this is John with Ozarks Backroads with you. We got the Mighty Tiger out. We've been out in Arizona this week. We're just about to ride into Tombstone, Arizona. We're on the outskirts of town here. We're going to ride through town, then we're going to see some the old Birdcage Theater, which was an old brothel and bar there in Tombstone. I want to go through it. A lot of the original stuff, or everything in there, is original to the period there from the early 1880s when Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and the crew were in charge there. So we're going to walk through the same doors that Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday had walked through. So we'll jump on the Mighty Tiger, take a ride into Tombstone here, and see what they've got to offer. So stick around. So I'm pretty excited to check out Tombstone. I've never been here before, but I've been wanting to come for a long time. This is definitely on my bucket list. Looks like we got parking right here on 3rd Street. $1881 on that house. Here's 6th Street. And I believe the Birdcage ought to be right down here at the end of the block, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just gonna park it right here. We are awful close to where we need to be. Yeah, we'll get the good camera out and we'll take a walk. Well, here we are on Main Street in Tombstone. Here is the Birdcage Theater, the original, right across the street here. Here it tells you a little bit about what's in it. The original bar room, the original gambling casino and dance hall, the hand-painted stage. They got 14 birdcage cribs. They got a poker room, a wine cellar, and a basement bordello. So they got all kinds of stuff in this little building right here.
So if you'd like to take a self-guided tour 140 years back in time, take a look, see behind that walls, see where fortunes were made and lost with a turn of a card. Step on up to the bar, we'll get you going.
The Birdcage was built here in 1881 and survived the fires of 1881 and 1882. We were built as a theater, but we were also a saloon, gambling, hall, and house of ill repute all under the same roof. There are 14 Birdcage cribs upstairs, 7 going back on each side of this bridge we call the catwalk. Ladies would be on that bridge, catch the eye of a gentleman on the floor, and take them up the narrow staircase to be entertained. We were only open 8.5 years, but those top few steps have been worn down to the thickness of a silver dollar by all that traffic. The bar sitting here is the original cherry wood bar and bar back. Our diamond dust mirrors came from Paris, France. This bar was made for us in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1881. After it was finished, the railroad refused to take it on as freight because they could not insure those diamond dust mirrors. So we opened with whiskey barrels and boards as a makeshift bar, while this one sailed around the Horn of South America to Guaymas, Mexico. Came here by wagon train and was put in place right where you see it for the grand opening December 26, 1881. There were 16 gunfights in here, 26 people died. We have about 140 bullet holes throughout the building. There is still a 45 caliber slug embedded in the upright of the bar down there today. Up in the ceiling between the light fixture and the fan, we have a 32. There's a 45 ricochet over on this show bill frame, and there is a 44 caliber slug in the green wall just to the right of Fatima.
Well, they got some pretty cool pictures hanging up on the walls in here. We got a picture here of Virgil and Wyatt Earp. Virgil's on the left and Wyatt's on the right. And it looks like John Clum, he's a friend of Wyatt's, well, a friend of both of them, is in the center there. Virgil was Wyatt's older brother. He was the city marshal at the time of the shooting of the OK Corral when that happened. Wyatt and Virgil and his other brother Morgan and Doc Holliday were involved in the OK Corral shooting. They put down some of the Cochise County cowboys there at the OK Corral. So that's pretty cool. Morgan Earp and his wife there at when they were in Tombstone in 1881. Morgan wound up getting killed. Some of the Cochise County cowboys during the feud, they shot him in the back while he was shooting pool one night, and that's when Wyatt went after all of them that he thought was involved there, and he took care of all those cowboys. Here we've got Johnny Ringo hanging on the wall. We went and saw his grave on our last video out here in the foothills of the Chiricahua Mountains. If you saw that video, we saw his grave. He was Doc Holliday's enemy. Him and Doc Holliday had a lot of trouble, and Johnny wound up out there in the wilderness next to a creek with a bullet hole in his head. So the folks that didn't get along with the Earps and their friends didn't seem to fare too well. Here are a couple of organs that were found in the building later on, years after it was closed up. These were still in there. I'm not sure if they're organs or pianos. I think they're organs. It looks like you pump them there, but that's kind of cool. They're still in the building. This is an old barber chair from Tombstone, and in this chair, Curly Bill Brocious came to town one day to get a haircut, among other things. But anyhow, he was recognized by somebody there in town while he was getting his haircut in this chair, and he went and Wyatt Earp was notified that Curly Bill was in town, and Wyatt didn't get to him before he left town, but he put a posse together and he went out, and they finally caught up with Curly Bill there and some of his buddies at a spring not too far from Tombstone, and Wyatt put an end to Curly Bill. Now, Curly Bill was believed to be one of the shooters there that killed Wyatt's brother Morgan, shot him in the back while he was playing pool one night. So Wyatt took care of Curly Bill there. Well, here's a picture of the grand piano that sits down in the orchestra pit next to the stage here at the Birdcage Theater. This is the original grand piano, and it's set in that very spot since 1881. It supplied furnished music for the shows and dances, and was built out of solid rosewood and was hand engraved. This piano was the first to arrive in Tombstone. It was shipped around the Horn of South America to San Francisco by boat, and then brought from there to Tombstone by mule train. It was a part of a 5-piece band that played the Birdcage Theater from 1881 through 1889. So since 1881, it hadn't moved from its location there in the orchestra pit. In this photo here, you can see up at the top, those little rooms up there, those are the theater seating, the private seating. That's where the Birdcage Theater got its name from. They refer to those as bird cages. You can see 4 of them up there, and I believe she said there was 7 on each side of the main hall there, so there'd be 14 of those in the building. And you can see some of the wallpaper they had there on the front. Is pretty neat. So here we're going to take a look at the faro table that was in the Birdcage Theater. This is the very faro table that Doc Holliday dealt faro on. He liked to play faro. He also had a duel with Johnny Ringo between this table and that grand piano we looked at earlier. They had a little spat there. So we'll take a look at it here. So this is the table that Doc Holliday, he played on this table, and actually dealt faro on this table. It's pretty cool that this stuff has survived all these years. This building never burnt or anything, and all this stuff that was in it, it's really a treasure to have this stuff. Well, sitting right here is the original funeral carriage that carried all those bodies up to the Boot Hill Cemetery for burial back in the day. Just sitting over here in the corner. They just happened to have it, I guess. Here it talks about the carriage. It says it was used from 1881 to 1917, and it says with the exception of 6 people, it buried everybody in Boot Hill Cemetery. Tells where it was built. They bought it for $8,000, brand new in 1881. There were only 8 of these things ever built. It talks about the railing is sterling silver, and there's gold leaf on the glass, which is pretty cool. So that's the original funeral cart right there. In this shot, you can see the gold leaf on the glass, around the edges of the glass, and then the grab rails on top of the coach and inside along the sides of the casket. Those it says those were sterling silver. So that's a pretty fancy rig. So here we've got a poster that was found inside the building, an advertisement that was hanging somewhere. It's got quite a bit of water stain on it, but it still looks pretty good. And you can read that. I think it kind of speaks for itself, what it was like in those days. Down in the basement here, they had a little room with some card tables set up. We got a couple of tables here. You can see the old blue velvet covering on the tables. Those are original and were left in place in the building. So that's pretty neat. Looks like people have been throwing dollar bills and stuff on the tables. It's kind of trashy looking, but that's the original spot for those tables there. Down here in the basement with the card tables, there's the little bar to serve the card players. And the sign says that the mirror you see hanging up there on the wall, and there's another one over on the wall on the right. It said those have been hanging there since 1881. They've never been moved. The bar is original. It's been there since 1881. And they said the whiskey keg there, and there's a little potbelly stove just to the left of that keg. They said that's where those were when the business closed in 1890, I believe, or 89. So that stuff's all been down there for a long time. I found a hole in the wall back at kind of in the back of the building, and I stuck my camera in there and took a few pics with the flash on, and I was surprised to see what was in there. It looks like there's some old whiskey kegs and some bottles, some old kerosene lamps, lantern-type lamps in there, and I don't know, somebody was collecting insulators off of the telegraph lines back in the day, because there's a bunch of those insulators sitting in there. That's kind of cool.
Well, here's a look at the Cochise County Courthouse, built in 1882. It's kind of cool. Masonry and brick. That was a pretty fine building for the era. Spent a lot of money on that. It's a shame the town went bust a few years later and everybody left. Well, you can't come to Tombstone, Arizona without going to the Boot Hill graveyard. See some of the old boys that lost their gunfights. Here we are at Boot Hill Cemetery. Got a few folks in here. Well, here's the folks that died in the big gunfight at the OK Corral here. Got Billy Clanton over here. Frank McClary. Tom McClary. Guess they all got buried together. Old man Clanton here, buried next to his boy. Right over here. Pretty interesting. Nearly every grave in here, the person died between 1880 and 1883. There are hundreds of graves in here. This was a rough place. For sure.
Well, that was pretty cool. The old graveyard there, Boot Hill. This was a rough place back in the silver boom. About 3 years there. Most of the people in that cemetery died between 79 and 83, 1879, 1883. There was a few that were outside of that, but not very many. Pretty cool little place. But the Birdcage Theater right there, that's the real McCoy. That's the original building. It hadn't been rebuilt or anything. It survived the fire. They had a big fire in 1881. And it pretty much burnt down the whole downtown right there. The Birdcage Theater, it survived. It was one of the only buildings there on Main Street that survived the fire. So it's the real McCoy. When the silver ran out there in the mine, there's a mine right there off the end of Main Street. When it played out, everybody just left. Took off and left. The town just went bust. The old Birdcage Theater there, it sat vacant till 1934. Somebody purchased it, and they said it's the same owners that have it now, or their family of the same owners. They found all that stuff in there, and they just made a museum out of it. So it's all real. It's pretty cool. And then, of course, Boot Hill Cemetery there. A lot of the folks buried up there are characters that you've heard about. And most of them died between 1879 and 1883 in that cemetery, most of those graves. In the Birdcage Theater there, they had the hearse that carried all but 2 people to that graveyard. All the people that are buried in there rode in that hearse except for 2 people. So that buried practically everybody in the graveyard rode that black horse-drawn hearse there. So that's pretty cool too. That's a real piece of history. Ike Clanton and the bunch from the shootout at the OK Corral, they all went in that hearse, and they're all buried together. Billy Clanton.